My dad left a message. You're out of the will. Don't bother coming back. I just texted back. Understood. Then I quietly removed my name from the $250,000 mortgage I'd been co-signing for years. 5 days later, 19 missed calls, a realtor's sign on the lawn, and their lawyer desperately asking, "Why would you do that?" I, 34 never thought my own father would kick me out of his life over a simple disagreement about my career choices. But that's exactly what happened last Monday afternoon when I received his text message while sitting in my office downtown. The message was short and brutal. He told me I was out of the will and shouldn't bother coming back home. No explanation beyond what we'd argued about the previous weekend when I told him I was leaving my corporate job to start my own consulting firm. He'd called it irresponsible and foolish, saying I was throwing away everything he'd worked to provide for me. I stared at the screen for a full minute, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach that always formed when my father expressed his disappointment. But this time, something was different. Instead of the usual guilt and desire to make things right, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. I typed back a single word, understood. Then I set my phone aside and got back to work, though my mind was racing through memories of the past 15 years. My father had always been controlling, always had opinions about every decision I made. When I'd graduated college, he'd push me toward the corporate world. When I'd wanted to travel after graduation, he'd guilt-tripped me into staying local. When I'd bought my first apartment, he'd insisted on co-signing the mortgage on his house so we could build our credit together. That last memory made me pause. The mortgage. I'd completely forgotten about that arrangement we'd made when I was 26, and he was refinancing his house. The bank had required a co-signer due to some credit issues he'd had after my mother's medical bills, and I'd gladly stepped in to help. Over the years, as my income grew and his remained steady, I'd gradually taken on more and more of the payment responsibility. By now, I was covering roughly 70% of the monthly mortgage payment on his $400,000 house. It had become such a routine part of my budget that I barely thought about it anymore. Every month, $1,800 automatically transferred from my account to help cover the payment. I pulled up my banking app and scrolled through the transaction history. There it was, month after month, year after year. Nearly $250,000 of my money had gone toward his mortgage over the past 8 years. Money I'd paid without complaint because he was my father and I thought we were building something together. His text message echoed in my mind. I was out of the will. Don't bother coming back. I called my bank and scheduled an appointment for the next morning. The banker, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, listened as I explained the situation. I told her I needed to remove myself as a co-signer from the mortgage and wanted to understand my options. She pulled up the account and her expression grew more serious as she reviewed the details. She explained that removing myself from the mortgage would require refinancing, and given my father's current income and credit situation, he likely wouldn't qualify for the loan on his own. The monthly payment was $2,600, and his income couldn't support that level of debt without my financial backing. I asked what would happen if I simply stopped making payments. She explained that while both our credits would be affected, the primary borrower would bear the brunt of the consequences. The bank would begin foreclosure proceedings after 3 to 6 months of missed payments. I thanked her for the information and left without making any immediate changes. I needed to think this through carefully. That evening, I sat in my apartment and really considered what my father had said. He'd cut me out of his life over a career decision. After everything I'd done, all the support I'd provided, he was willing to throw away our relationship because I wouldn't live my life according to his expectations. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just at the text message, but at years of manipulation and control. Every major decision in my life had been influenced by his opinions, his guilt trips, his threats to withdraw support. Even now, at 34, I'd been seeking his approval for my business venture instead of just doing what I knew was right for me. I made my decision. The next morning, I returned to the bank and initiated the process to remove myself from the mortgage. The banker warned me again about the potential consequences, but I was resolute. I also set up the automatic payment cancellation to take effect at the end of the month, giving my father one final payment as a courtesy. I didn't tell him what I was doing. If he wanted me out of his life, then I would respect his wishes completely. The next few days passed normally. I focused on my new business, reached out to potential clients, and began setting up my home office. I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. On Friday evening, exactly 5 days after his original text, my phone started ringing. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately. I let that one go too. Over the next hour, he called 17 more times. I turned off my phone and went to bed. Saturday morning, I turned my phone back on to find 2 additional missed calls and 3 voicemail messages. The first voicemail was my father asking me to call him back, saying it was important. The second was him asking why I hadn't returned his calls. The third was different. His voice was strained, almost panicked. He said he'd gotten a call from the bank about the mortgage and needed to speak with me immediately. I deleted all 3 messages without fully listening to them. Around noon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. The voice on the other end introduced himself as my father's lawyer. He asked if I had a few minutes to discuss an urgent matter regarding the property mortgage. His tone was professional, but I could detect an underlying tension. He explained that my father had contacted him about some issues with the mortgage and asked if I was aware of any recent changes to the loan agreement. I told him that I had recently removed myself as a co-signer, which was my legal right to do. There was a long pause before he asked why I had made that decision. I explained about my father's text message, about being cut out of the will and told not to come back. I mentioned that I was simply respecting his wishes for me to be out of his life. The lawyer's tone shifted. He asked if I understood the financial implications of my decision. I told him I understood them perfectly. He asked if I would be willing to reconsider, perhaps if my father apologized and reinstated me in the will. I thought about that for a moment. Then I told him that my father had made his position clear, and I was simply responding accordingly. If he wanted to repair our relationship, that was a conversation we could have, but the mortgage situation would not be part of any negotiations. The lawyer thanked me for my time and hung up. Sunday morning, I decided to drive past my father's house. I wasn't planning to stop or make contact, but I was curious about what was happening. As I turned onto his street, I immediately noticed the large "For Sale" sign planted in his front yard. I parked across the street and stared at the house I'd helped pay for over the past 8 years. The lawn was overgrown, and the paint was peeling around the window frames. Without my monthly contributions, he clearly couldn't afford the upkeep, let alone the mortgage payments. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my father. "Please call me. We need to talk." I sat there for a long time, looking at the house and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Part of me felt guilty for what I'd done. This was still my father, and I was watching his life fall apart in real time. But a larger part of me felt vindicated. For years, I'd been treated as a financial resource rather than a son. Every conversation eventually turned to what I could do for him, how I could help, what he needed. When I'd finally tried to make a decision about my own life, he'd cut me off without hesitation. I started my car and drove home without responding to his text. Update 1. That evening, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing on my porch, looking haggard and older than I'd ever seen him. His hair was disheveled, and his clothes looked like he'd slept in them. I considered not answering, but ultimately decided this conversation needed to happen. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. He immediately launched into an explanation about how the text message had been sent in anger, how he hadn't meant what he said about the will. He said he'd been stressed about money and worried about my decision to leave my stable job. He asked why I hadn't talked to him before removing myself from the mortgage. I listened to his entire speech without interrupting. When he finished, I asked him a simple question. Did he still believe my decision to start my own business was irresponsible and foolish? He hesitated, then said he was concerned about my financial security, but admitted that maybe he'd been too harsh in his reaction. I told him that his text message had been clear and direct. He'd wanted me out of his life, and I'd respected that decision. The mortgage situation was simply a natural consequence of that choice. He grew more agitated, insisting that I knew he depended on my help with the house payment. He said I was being vindictive and trying to punish him for one moment of anger. That's when I realized he still didn't understand. He wasn't apologizing for trying to control my life or for the hurtful things he'd said. He was just upset about the financial consequences of his actions. I told him that I'd spent years helping him financially while he criticized and controlled every aspect of my life. When I'd finally stood up for myself, he'd immediately tried to cut me out completely. I explained that I wasn't trying to punish him, but I also wasn't going to continue supporting someone who had made it clear I wasn't welcome in their life. He asked what it would take to fix things between us. I told him it would require a genuine change in how he treated me, not just words motivated by financial desperation. He left after that, and I haven't heard from him since Sunday night. Update 2. 3 weeks have passed since my last update, and the situation has evolved in ways I didn't expect. The house sold faster than anyone anticipated. Apparently, there had been quite a bit of interest in the neighborhood, and my father accepted an offer after just 2 weeks on the market. From what I gathered through mutual family friends, he barely broke even after paying off the remaining mortgage balance and covering the realtor fees. He's moved into a small apartment across town, and from all accounts, he's struggling to adjust to his new financial reality. Last Tuesday, I received a call from my aunt, my father's sister, who I've always had a good relationship with. She asked if I would meet her for coffee to discuss the situation. I agreed, curious about what she might have to say. She told me that my father had been staying with her for a few days after the move and had finally opened up about everything that had happened. According to her, he'd admitted that he'd been using me financially for years and had justified it by telling himself that he was helping me build credit and teaching me responsibility. She said he'd also acknowledged that the text message about the will had been cruel and calculated to hurt me as much as possible. He'd been angry that I was succeeding professionally and becoming independent because it meant he was losing control over my decisions. What surprised me most was when she told me that my father had specifically instructed her not to try to convince me to help him or reconcile. He'd told her that he was finally beginning to understand the damage he'd done to our relationship and didn't want to make things worse. She asked if I missed having him in my life. I told her honestly that I missed the father I'd hoped he could be, but I didn't miss the constant criticism and manipulation. My business has been going well. I've landed 3 significant clients, and my income is already approaching what I was making at my corporate job. The extra $1,800 per month that I'm no longer sending to my father has given me a financial cushion that's allowing me to take some strategic risks with my business growth. I've also started therapy to work through some of the issues from my childhood and young adulthood. My therapist has helped me understand that my father's behavior was a pattern of financial and emotional manipulation that had been going on much longer than I'd realized. Update 3. It's been 2 months now since this all started, and I'm writing what I expect will be my final update on this situation. Last week, I received a letter in the mail from my father. Not a text or email, but an actual handwritten letter. In it, he apologized for years of controlling behavior and acknowledged that he'd been using me financially while convincing himself that he was helping me. He wrote that losing the house had forced him to confront the reality of his financial situation and his relationship with me. He said he'd realized that he'd been more concerned with maintaining control over my life than with my actual happiness or success. The letter included a check for $50,000, his portion of the proceeds from the house sale after all expenses were paid. He wrote that while he couldn't repay everything I'd contributed over the years, he wanted to return what he could. He ended the letter by saying that he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but that he hoped someday I might be willing to try rebuilding our relationship on more equal terms. I've been carrying that letter around for a week, reading it multiple times and trying to decide how I feel about it. Yesterday, I deposited the check and used the money to make a significant investment in my business, new equipment and software that will allow me to expand my services. It felt appropriate to use his money to further the career path he'd initially criticized. I haven't decided whether to respond to his letter yet. Part of me appreciates that he finally seems to understand what he did wrong. But I also know that real change takes time to prove, and words are easier than sustained behavioral changes. My therapist suggested that I don't need to make any immediate decisions about contact. The most important thing is that I've established boundaries and demonstrated that I won't accept being treated as a financial resource rather than a son. For now, I'm focusing on building my business and my own life. If my father wants to be part of that life again someday, it will have to be as an equal relationship built on mutual respect, not financial dependence and control. The missed calls have stopped. The desperate voicemails have stopped. The lawyer hasn't called back. Sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation is simply walking away and letting people face the natural consequences of their choices. I've learned that family relationships, like any other relationships, require mutual respect and consideration. Blood relation doesn't give someone the right to control your life or take your support for granted. My business is thriving, I'm financially stable, and for the first time in years, I'm making decisions based on what I want rather than what someone else expects from me. Whatever happens with my father going forward, I know I made the right choice in standing up for myself. The house is gone, the mortgage is resolved, and I'm finally free to live my own life on my own terms. Sometimes the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is exactly what you need to begin writing a better one.